Fights with Friends, are you ready for UFC on Fox 31? The rematch between Raging Al Iaquinta and Kevin Lee coming up this Saturday. I'm pretty excited about it, and we have some great fights on the main card. I'm going to break down the top four, and I'm going to start out with a legend, Jim Miller, versus Charles Oliveira. Let's start with the breakdown on Charles Oliveira. 24 wins, 16 by submission, 6 knockouts. This guy's only seen the final bell twice in any of his wins. He has been knocked out 4 times and submitted 3 times. Jim Miller, older, 35 years old, 29-12, fought a ton of fights. This guy's got 41 fights. He's also a submission master. 4 knockouts to his credit, 10 decisions. You look at his losses. He has been finished 4 times. That is not a lot over 41 fights, though, and only twice by submission. So let's go down and look at his last fights. He just came off a 4-fight losing streak. I think Jim Miller's probably, towards the end of his career, definitely on the downside of it. But these are some big names he lost to. A lot of contenders, even Dustin Poirier went the distance with Anthony Pettis, went the distance with Francisco Trinaldo, was stopped by Dan Hooker, by knees, and then his last fight, he got back in the win column with probably a must-win over Alex White. I think if he would have lost that one, Dana might have pulled him aside and said, hey, it's probably time to call it a career. But two really good fighters. Like I said, 2 really good submission artists. I think the 6-year age difference is going to play a huge part, though. And some of these lighter weight fighters seem to age faster than the heavyweights and the heavier fighters. Jim Miller fits that criteria, and he's got a lot of miles on him. I mean, I'm not saying 32 fights for Oliveira is anything to scoff at, but 41, 9 more fights there. I just think Jim Miller's got too many miles on him, and I think Charles Oliveira wins this one. I don't think he gets the submission. I think it ends up going the distance, but I think he does dominate Jim Miller. Let's go to the next fight on the main card. Rob Font versus the younger brother of Anthony, of course, Sergio Pettis. Rob Font, 15 wins, 7 knockouts, 4 submissions, only 4 going to decision. As you know, I like finishes, so he's on the good side with that. Only been submitted once in his career. 3 of his 4 losses have came by decision. Quality of opponent, not so great. When he has stepped up, he has a very big victory over Thomas Almeida recently. Let's not discount that. He has lost 2 of his last 3, though. 1 to Pedro Munoz. He was submitted by a guillotine choke. And then in his last fight, he did go the distance with Rafael Asasanya, but was not super competitive in that fight. He did survive. Let's go over, and he is 31 years old, still a young fighter. But let's go over to Sergio Pettis. Always improving, 25 years old. We know the 125-pound division is probably on its last leg. So he's going to be fighting at 135 most likely here in the future if he decides to stay in the UFC, which I think he will, outside of getting a huge offer from somebody else. And I just don't think he's that kind of superstar yet, especially since he doesn't finish a whole lot of fights. Unfortunately for him, in 17 wins, he only has 6 finishes, 3 by knockout, 3 by submission. Let's take a look at his last fights. He's got a victory over John Moraga. That's a big victory. Went the distance with Henry Cejudo in a losing effort. got a split decision win over Joseph Benavidez, which is absolutely huge. And then loses the last one, unanimous decision to UCR de Silva. I think Sergio Pettis matches up well against Rob Font. I don't think he's going to finish him by submission or knockout, but I think he's getting better and better every fight. If I had to bet on this one, it would be Sergio Pettis to win a unanimous decision. Let's go to the co-main event. Dan Hooker versus Edson Barboza. These guys are both crazy strikers. Dan Hooker, just 28 years old. He's 17-7. He has 9 knockouts. He also has 7 submissions. So a more complete game than Edson Barboza. He has 7 losses, but he's never been knocked out, which that should help him against Edson Barboza, being that he's had a great chin. Only been finished twice, both by submission. Coming off of a victory over Gilbert Burns to cap off a 4-fight win streak. Everything there looks good. Quality of opponent. Ross Pearson is getting a little older, but impressive victory by knee. Submission victory there. Jim Miller, he knocks him out with a knee. And then, like I said, Gilbert Burns. So he's finished his last 4 opponents after losing a decision to Jason Knight. Edson Barboza, of course, also a striker, only 1 submission to his credit. 11 knockouts, though. This guy hits like a truck. He has been finished twice by submission, twice by knockout. And then, of course, the 2 decisions, one to the current champ, Khabib Nurmagomedov. He is on a 2-fight losing streak. But those are 2 of the top guys in the division, Kevin Lee and Khabib Nurmagomedov. Before that, he had an impressive 5-fight streak from 2015 to now, where he beats Paul Felder, Anthony Pettis, Gilbert Melendez, and Beneil Dariush. His only loss to El Kakui, maybe the best 155-pounder on the planet, at the Ultimate Fighter finale in 2015. And now he finds himself on a skid. But only 2 fights. Quality of opponent much, much higher for Edson Barboza. Unfortunately for Dan Hooker, I feel like he is a very poor man, a broke man's version of Edson Barboza. Let's get into the main event of the evening. A rematch, Kevin Lee versus Iaquinta. Let's go back and look at what both these men have done since the first fight. Iaquinta, 17 fights, 13-4. He's still only 31 years old. He's got 7 knockouts, a sub. 5 times he's went to decision. He has been submitted 3 times. Lost his last fight, of course, to Khabib Nurmagomedov. Last-minute replacement, though, did much better than pretty much anybody thought he was going to do. After that, right before that, he had a 5-fight win streak, including some names: Ross Pearson. Before Pearson started on his downside, I think, Joe Lozon, Jorge Masvidal, who, of course, is a stud, and Diego Sanchez. So some pretty big names on there since that Kevin Lee fight in 2014, over 4 years ago. That was a unanimous decision then. He was not able to finish Kevin Lee. But let's look at what Kevin Lee has done since then and try to figure out why Kevin Lee is a 3-1 favorite coming into this when Ray Janelle won the first match. Well, let's start out with the fact Kevin Lee was only 21 years old the first time they fought. He just turned 26 in September, fighting out of Extreme Couture. He's got 8 submissions, 2 knockouts, seen the final bell in 7 of his victories. All his losses, he's lost in every way you can, but only once. Once by decision, once by submission, once by knockout. Tony Ferguson, of course, was the guy who submitted him. And who doesn't Tony Ferguson submit or beat? His knockout loss came to Leonardo Santos. That's been a decent amount of time ago as well, 3 years ago. Since then, he's got victories. He beat Efren Escudero, former Ultimate Fighter champion. Was on the downside of his career there, though, but big victory over Francisco Trinaldo and Michael Chiesa. This is very big, getting the choke win over Michael Chiesa, because Chiesa has great jiu-jitsu himself. And then his last fight, his most impressive win, I think, against Edson Barboza. And I think this tells us a lot about this fight, because Edson Barboza hit Kevin Lee with his absolutely hardest shot. Kevin Lee was rocked, but he recovered. He continued. And that makes me believe that Iaquinta has very little chance of knocking out Kevin Lee. And I think that was his only path to victory in this fight. Going 5 rounds by the end of it. I think Kevin Lee does what Khabib Nurmagomedov couldn't do, and I think he finishes the Raging One Iaquinta. I think he gets a submission. I'm going to say he gets it in the 4th round. These two have been going back and forth at each other in the media like crazy, though. Let's start this out looking into this. Kevin Lee was recently on the MMA Hour with Luke Thomas, said that he didn't like Raging Al very much. And let's listen to a little bit of that interview and hear what Kevin Lee had to say.
I want to follow up on that in just a minute, but you said you didn't like Al. Okay, tell me why. Now, let me give you my vantage point from a media guy, which is very different. I don't have to fight him. But at the same time, he can be, look, he's got a fiery disposition sometimes. But when it comes to us, he's super professional. He's friendly. He speaks out on behalf of fighter interests. Why doesn't that matter?
I mean, he has some, of course, I've had a couple people say this to me already. He's got some good qualities probably, but we just are two different types of people. We crossed paths a couple times in these last years. And, we just two different. He's that Jersey boy that's going to get drunk and fuck up a hotel room. And, I just don't think there's his voice shouldn't be no bigger than it already is. So I feel like it's my personal duty to get him up out of there and put him back on the prelims.
So Raging Al, just as you would expect, very witty in his comeback and very quick right after Kevin Lee does this. Says, it's my personal duty to put him back in an apartment. Hashtag UFC Milwaukee. Great comeback from him, and it goes further than this. I'm going to leave a link to this video. I'm not going to put this whole video because it's somebody else's, and it's kind of long, so you can decide whether you want to watch it or not. But he had a friend go through a airport, and this was on Periscope, also on this guy's YouTube channel. Aaron Weinbaum is the guy's name. But what he does is he goes through a Detroit, Michigan airport, which of course Kevin Lee is from Detroit, Michigan, and he's asking people at the EA Sports Shop and other places if they know who Kevin Lee is. So just kind of punking Kevin Lee there. I thought it was pretty funny. I'm going to leave the link down to that down below, as well as the link the UFC has made available their very first fight on their free fights, as they do sometimes. Kevin Lee versus Iaquinta 1. Of course, I cannot post this here because of copyrights, and I would probably lose my channel, and UFC would come and beat down my door. But I will leave that link down below. So it looks like this one, Fox's final card. The main card's going to start at 4 p.m. So I'll start streaming at 4:30 p.m. I will not schedule that. You will not see it in the scheduled streams until after Bellator's event on Friday. Don't forget, Michael Chandler versus Brent Primus 2. Two rematches this weekend, and the person who lost the first fight, they are both heavily favored to lose. And I have to agree with the odds makers on how they came to those conclusions. But I want to know what you think. Are you excited about this? Are you excited about Kevin Lee versus Iaquinta? How do you see this fight going? And I want to know, what do you guys want to see from me in the future? That's something I've been meaning to ask recently. I want you guys to throw out some ideas. What kind of videos would you like to see? Do you like the MMA trivia? Do you like fights with finishes, which I am working on the 3rd episode for those 100 people that watched the first 2? I am working on that today. I promise this time, so it will come out. For those 100 of you that care about it, hopefully a few more people watch it. But let me know down there in the comments what you think. Please hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button if you're new there. Ring that bell to make sure that you're notified every time I go live or post another video. Until next time, as always, I love you, I respect you, and I'll see your fine asses later.